This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview.
Joining us today is Tony Hamilton, the CEO of Georgina Energy, following an announcement from the company about additional well re-entry opportunities. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Tony. How are you?
Good, thanks, Mark. Thank you for having me.
No, it's always good to be catching up here. So you're evaluating potential additional well re-entry targets within the Centralian Super Basin, where 10 priority targets have been identified of a possible 168 currently plugged and abandoned wells. So I guess these haven't come out of the blue. Give us a bit of an idea about where these have come from and why you're making this announcement today.
So if you remember back on the 8th of August, 8 days after we listed and raised the money, we put a number of clear things that we were doing, and one of them was to review other opportunities. So we initially started with a list of 168 wells plugged and abandoned. And then we essentially moved that 168 wells down to 26 wells, 16 in the Amadeus Basin and 10 in the Officer Basin. Now, bear in mind the Australian Central Super Basin is some 2 million square kilometres. So it's a fairly large area. But the benefit we have is that the well completion reports for all of these are available. And as a consequence, out of those 26 from the original 168, we then got down to 10. And those 10 essentially meet our criteria for re-entry or deepening existing well, where there's the potential for the presence of helium, hydrogen and natural gas.
Okay.
So that was the process, but it was a very long and involved process. And the geologist/geophysicist we engaged has spent many hours arriving at this.
Okay, and is this something you were waiting for? Because I know you've been involved with Georgina for a long time prior to getting on the markets here, so you probably had an idea of other opportunities. But was it something that you had to really wait for to get listed, to get motoring, to actually, really talk about these with a bit more confidence?
Yeah, I mean, Georgina's been 5 years in the making. Mark and I have got £2.5 million of our own money in it. And in order for us to file and lodge the application to drill at Hussar, we needed to raise the £5 million. And that included meeting our commitments at Mount Winter once we get the permit granted. So, yes, it was very much, we had a very clear mind of what we were doing, but we were limited by our private equity and our own personal capital. Once we were listed, the focus then became, okay, now we can look at these other wells, because obviously our objective is Hussar, Mount Winter, and then move on to the next targets.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. So yes, as well as Mount Winter and Hussar, you're going to take these 10 and really take them down to 2 top candidates, which would be the ones to go as effectively program 3 and 4?
Yeah. I think these will be subsequent events to Hussar and Mount Winter. As you know, with Mount Winter, we have a meeting on the 11th of September with the indigenous landowners in Alice Springs. Whereby we are looking to obtain the granting of permission to grant the permit.
Yeah.
In the case of Hussar, obviously we couldn't lodge any permits for drilling until we had the 5 million secured, because one of the very major conditions with the government is that you have the funding behind you to undertake the program that you put forward. We have that now, and every part of the paperwork, the applications, all of that was already done. It just required the money. And then, of course, it required the engagement of Aztec Well Construction to manage the whole process for us.
Okay, yeah. Well, that meeting, of course, happening in the next sort of week to 2 weeks, the 11th of September there, so not too long away. So everything's still on track. You get that permit and everything's planned, ready to go to re-enter before year end, as you've hoped for and said in the past.
Yes, and we remain, I won't use the word on track because I've been criticised for using it too often. We remain on target to be on site in December to commence re-entry at Hussar.
Perfect.
And that hasn't changed, nor has it changed that we are of the opinion that we will be successful in Alice Springs on the 11th of September. And then obviously we will inform the market of the outcome, assuming it's positive, then, which we have every expectation that it will be, then we will immediately move towards meeting all of our obligations for the 75% earn-in. I might also add that as part of our original announcement back on the 8th of August when we identified the additional targets, for those astute shareholders, they'll note that we executed a confidentiality agreement with a well-established producing Australian oil and gas company. And that is part of our strategy, because if you look at our announcement, one of the elements that determines our priority targets is whether or not we can secure ownership or rights to the wells. And this is just part of that process. So something that we've been doing, and now obviously as a listed company, and also bear this in mind, there's a significant premier value or prestige value to being listed on the LSE, and more particularly on the main board. And that has held us in good stead with a number of the companies that we are talking to to secure 2 of those top 10 that we've whittled our list down to.
Okay, so when you talk about ownership and rights, is this more procedural thing going through with this Australian oil and gas company here
Yeah, we obviously can't, we're unable to name them, but clearly from our perspective, executing an NDA with them was part of that process, so that we can negotiate with them for the rights to secure ownership or farm-in rights on the wells that we have in our list. And the list of 10, they're prioritised. So clearly some are not going to be available, or some are going to be subject to different things. But the criteria or the basis upon which we've selected them is primarily the re-entry, the previously drilled, the presence of potential presence of helium and hydrogen, and in the case of the Officer Basin, it's the relevance to the Townsend subsalt formation, and in the case of Amadeus, it's to do with the Heavy Tree subsalt formation. So that's the criteria that we're looking at. Okay. And also bear in mind, in the case of Australia, 9% helium concentration is fairly normal. I think in terms of what we as a company are doing, and the fact that we are following a very specific process, the consultants that we've engaged, Aztec, etc., we're being taken very seriously simply because we're a London and LSE listed public company, and we have funding behind us. Okay. So all of that assists in the process when you're going to talk to people about acquiring the rights. Some of the wells are actually potentially abandoned altogether. So they may be vacant, but again, we're not saying too much because I don't want to give anybody else the heads up of to what we're looking for or what we're looking at.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tony. That gives a bit more light on that recent announcement today, and looking forward to perhaps catching up, in a week or two after that permit is hopefully granted, and we can talk about the re-entry plans. But for now, Tony Hamilton, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programmes at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.